Welcome back. You're watching Newsmaker Live with me, Kendall Burton. I'm a guest this evening, Joel Coelho Rosberg, the gender specialist at UNFPA, and Flavia Cherry, national representative for CAFRA, as well as the coordinator of Caribbean Coalition on Population and Development. We're speaking about gender-based violence as well as reproductive health. Before the break, we had shifted our focus to reproductive health, talking about how aware women are of their reproductive rights and reproductive health. Perhaps we can continue on that trend. What do you think can be done to empower women to have more of a say with regards to reproductive health?
I think there needs to be broad-based public education so that women are aware that they have those inalienable rights. It is a woman's right to determine the number and spacing of her children, and it is her right to determine when and how she wants to have sex. And that inherent in those rights are also responsibilities for self and for the community as well, so that women practice, have safer sex practices to ensure that they themselves, that their reproductive health is maintained and that they contribute better to the society in terms of having the right amount of children and ensuring that they are able to maintain those children, and all of that is part of reproductive health and rights. And so it's very important for the state as well to ensure that those rights are not impacted negatively in any way by ensuring that there are no legal impediments in place to prevent women from fully accessing their reproductive rights.
I perhaps would like to add that in my previous life, before moving to work with UNFP, I worked in the area of sexual and reproductive health as the executive director for a family planning organization in Belize. And I remember I was actually at Cairo at the meeting in Cairo. So the program of action which resulted from that meeting was very instrumental in taking us in the direction of the broader context of sexual and reproductive health. Because prior to that, people saw family planning as a means of controlling the population size. And then we moved under the concept of sexual and reproductive health, where it was not an issue of numbers, but an issue of the quality of people's lives. And we know that there are a number of health benefits from planning your family. You don't want young people to be having children before they're ready, before their bodies are ready. You know the burden that it creates on the young person to become a mother before they're ready, like motherhood in childhood. And so there are a number of social economic issues that must be taken on board when we look at the whole context of sexual and reproductive health. And so I think, and then we have to also look at the component of health and family life education and the extent to which it prepares the child. And again, I want to refer to something that Flavia made, where you want to look at age-appropriate education in schools. You want to ensure that the child at each level understand their bodies, how it works, the kinds of feelings that they will have during adolescence and puberty and moving on. So the concern that we have as educators in a broader context is that we prepare the child for life, and we prepare the child, and by doing that we not only have to address education in an academic sense, but also education as it affects their choice of skills and their choice and the decisions they make that will affect their lives forever in the long run.
Okay, we have another call. Let's take that call and we can continue with your train of thought. Hi, good evening, caller. You're on the air.
Hello, good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening, all of you listening to Panel.
I didn't get that.
I am very intrigued to hear the stress on protecting women from having children and all this stuff that's going on. But I have a difficulty in accepting the fact that every stress is being placed on women protecting this and protecting that, and nothing is in place on men protecting, because it's been sounding like most of the times the men are the ones always forcing having sex, and women are not forcing having sex. Men are not the ones who are enforcing children on men, but men are only enforcing children on men. Let me tell you, there's so many instances men try to avoid having kids, and the kids are enforced on men by different ways and means.
Okay.
The only way a man can enforce a woman having a child is by using some excessive ways of having a child from a woman. If a woman doesn't want to have a child, a man cannot, and I enforce the word, cannot have a woman to have get pregnant for them. But a woman can do it in any way possible they can do it. I would like to hear you on that issue, because I want you to make it clear and don't stress on the women issues alone. Let's be fair and let us be balanced in this entire situation going in this world. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for calling. I'm not sure I understood.
It was a
everything you
little
were
bit
saying,
confusing, but I think the gist of
He's
it...
asking for balance.
Yeah, he's asking for balance, and he's saying that a man... In other words, what I get from that is that it's not the man's responsibility, like it's the woman's responsibility to ensure that she doesn't get pregnant, and that even when men don't want to have children, somehow women force the children on them. And my response to this is that both men and women need to be sexually responsible. Nobody is saying to men and women that they should not have sex, but I think as adults we need to ensure that we are responsible. If a man does not want to have children, it is also his responsibility. He shouldn't depend on the woman to, for example, using the pill. And what we say to women now is that predominantly women should also, even if they use the pill, be also using the condom, which is the safest method.
Protection.
You need dual protection. And so it is the responsibility of the man, if you do not want to have children, to ensure that you use a condom. And it is also the responsibility of the woman. So it is their responsibility collectively. And in the process of sex, there needs to be negotiation, and we are aware that there are power relations that come into play, which very often the men use their influence to suggest that the condom should not be used. And it may very well be that the woman is the one who suggested it, but at the end of the day, even if a woman suggested it and a man knows he doesn't want to have children, or he doesn't want to have a sexually transmitted infection, then it is his responsibility to ensure that that sexual act is done in a way that doesn't pose a risk to either party. So I think we all, as men and women, are responsible for our sexual health. And today, in the context of HIV and AIDS, all individuals have a responsibility to protect their sexual health. And the best way to do it is to ensure that you use protection at all times.
We have another call. Good evening, caller. You're on the air.
Yeah, good night.
Hi.
I just want to follow up on the last caller.
Okay.
Because my first child, I was living with someone, my child mother, and I was giving her the contraceptive, and every time I came, she will just take the pill. You will see the emptiness there, but she will just tell me that she used the pill and she never used that. And that's how I get my first child.
Okay.
So there was no need for us to use condom, because we were living together, and there was no other party involved. But she was never using the pill. She just was taking it and maybe flush it down the toilet. And the other issue is the issue of child abuse, sexual abuse. I've never heard of a female was arrested or taken to court for having sex with a minor. And it's happening all over. Because anytime you hear about child abuse, you're saying it's a male. But there are female having sex with children. I want the panel to comment on that.
Okay. Thank you very much for calling.
Sexual abuse with a minor is against the law, and that means below the age of consent, which is 16, and whether it is done by a man or a woman, it is a crime and it is punishable by law. So if you are aware, caller, of any women who are having sex with underage children, you need to report it. And any citizen in St. Lucia that is aware of this, whether it is being done by a man or a woman, it is a crime against the state and it needs to be reported. I think the caller also spoke about his first child being an unplanned.
Which I think you addressed already.
Yes.
The responsibility is on both
Yes.
parties.
It's a dual responsibility.
Yeah.
Let's focus on something that's been touched on earlier in the program, the legal aspect of things. Apart from a strong record of prosecution, what else can be done to address the gender-based violence issue from a legal perspective?
Well, I know that in quite a few countries there have been laws put in place, and what we have found is that somehow the system is not working to implement the laws. Now, whether it's a case of not having the necessary resources, meaning the legal persons in place, the need to set up the courts. I mean, at our meeting today, one of the crucial concerns that people voiced was a backlog of cases and the length of time a case takes to reach the court. And some of the legal minds at the meeting kind of voiced the fact that the system has to be addressed. So I think there are some things inherent in the way the legal system is working, apart from maybe length of sentences or the time it takes to reach the court, but the whole issue of access to justice. And that takes in a number of things: the collection of evidence, the way evidence is stored, how quickly the cases reach the court, whether there are persons available to deal with these cases when they reach. I mean, it's a myriad of things. And one of the concerns I have is that the training we did in December met a part of that need, but there are other needs that need to be met. And when we recall the consensus document that came out of the Barbados meeting, it identified point by point a whole number of things that needs to be done. Sometimes, I mean, we had a case where at a meeting I attended recently, where it was identified that the law had changed to take effect for more serious punishment for certain crimes. But the sentencing was done in such a way that that wasn't taken on board. So we identified the needs for training of magistrates and lawyers to address that, and judges. And so there's a whole set of issues that I think run across not only the issue of the legal component, but the support that you will give to the victim during that period. We've heard about the settlement of cases. Why did that happen? Was it because somebody dropped the ball, or because something happened that ought not to happen? Even though we know that all the options have to be made available to the victim. There are so many questions that we can't answer, and therefore I think the need to really analyze and assess where we are falling down in terms of the legal system, I think exists throughout the region. We have identified a lot of problems. Is it resources that's keeping us back? Why is it we can't get it right? Is it the political will not there? Is it that, there are so many issues that I think we have to take on board in terms of addressing those concerns.
Whose responsibility do you think it is to keep the fire under the feet of the powers that be?
I think it's a collective responsibility. It's a responsibility of the various agencies, statutory organizations, and civil society organizations also play a major role. And to answer that question directly, I think we do have some very good laws. They're not perfect, but we have some very good laws. The issue is in enforcement of those laws. And the problem lies, I think, largely in the fact that along the way, within the system of justice, some areas just don't work properly. So what we need, I think, urgently are accountability mechanisms. So for example, a police officer who doesn't do his job, who allows the 180 days to pass, needs to be held accountable. There needs to be some mechanism within the police force that there are perhaps records in a file, prevention of promotion, and if it is at the level of the DPP, that there are accountability mechanisms there as well. If it is at the level of the highest level, which is the judge or the magistrate, that we need accountability mechanisms. But inherent in that, for the system to properly work, we also need resources, because one of the things that came out today is that there's a serious lack of resources. That in, for example, the DPP's office, that there are not sufficient lawyers, there are not sufficient prosecutors, there are not sufficient magistrates and judges, and that is an issue throughout the Caribbean based on the information coming through. There are not sufficient resources for social intervention for victims. So we need accountability mechanisms, and we also need to ensure that the resources are available to make the system work.
Okay. Speaking of areas that don't work, what can a lack of forensic capacity mean for a case? We'll take a call and then you can answer that question. Good evening, caller. You're on the air.
Yes, good evening. I asked the question a while ago about potential responsibility of men and women, but I think I haven't get my answered right. Okay. Let me get into one thing now. You will know for a fact right now that as legal is concerned, the law is predominantly on the women's side. Alright?
Okay.
If a woman comes to the law at this point now and say her husband forced her to have sex, right? Predominantly, you'll find the law will get violent in that case and then take this man down and do everything. If a man comes to say a woman, his wife or his girlfriend raped him, how does the whole system look at this man? This is one we have to get rid of, right? Secondly, as far as I'm concerned, when the question about it's not about condom. In the time gone by, I was born, there was no such thing as condom. There was that thing of natural family planning. Where have that gone to? Why don't we think of going to our basics? We always try to put ourselves into something that we get from everywhere else coming in and adopt it. Why don't we adopt what we know, which is natural, and go through the natural basis that we have? Where we choose to put these things aside and to adopt all kinds of stuff that come in at this point, and we all remain at the same place. We don't go nowhere further.
Okay, caller. Thank you very much for your contribution.
You are.
Yeah. You want to respond to that?
I would love to say to the caller that his request for us to return to the times of old when you use the rhythm method and natural family planning. We have to be realistic, and any responsible adult will protect his or her sexual health. We all individually are responsible for our sexual health, and whether it is you're married, you're in a common law relationship, you have a boyfriend, a girlfriend, every single individual is responsible to ensure that, apart from, even if you have the pill, even if you want to use the rhythm method, you still need to ensure that you have protected sex, unless if you're 100% certain. For example, if you want to have a child and you're 100% certain that you've had an HIV test and an STD test, and you are sure that your partner, your husband, or whoever it is safe, then you go ahead and have a child. We need to be responsible for our own sexual health, and this message needs to be across the board, whether it is a temporary relationship, a married relationship, a common law relationship, a visiting relationship. We need to be sexually responsible and ensure that we use condoms, and condoms are here to stay. Can you imagine what would have happened if we did not have the condom in this context of HIV and AIDS,
It's a very
and the
different time
I don't want
myriad,
to imagine.
and the
I
myriad
don't-
of sexually transmitted infections that are around,
Right.
every single man and woman is responsible for their sexual health, and that is why you need sexual autonomy, and you must have your sexual and reproductive rights respected. Every single individual is responsible for that. We cannot go back, and if people want to use the rhythm method, fine, but you also have to be willing to accept the repercussions of having unprotected sex.
Absolutely.
And that is the reason why we've been promoting, I mean, in the family planning movement, we have been reporting, encouraging dual protection, because even it is just simply not safe in the existing environment for you to do that. It's almost an act of irresponsibility.
It's like suicide.
So you wouldn't want to be promoting natural methods at this time. I mean, as Flavia was saying, in an environment where we know it is completely safe, that's a choice you make.
I think the caller established that in his earlier comment. That it's a very
In the
different
days
time
of
that we're living.
old.
Exactly.
Yes.
In the
definitely.
innocent times when all you needed was an injection for a simple STI.
But
we
he also
it's
brought up
different.
another point about male rape.
Yes.
Would you care to address that? Because you mentioned earlier that even with the female violence is underreported. I can imagine it is significantly more so with the males.
Yes. I have friends who consistently share that fact, saying, well, what are you doing about the men? How are we protecting men? And at our meeting today, again, there was a director from one of the countries in the region who identified the fact that this man came and reported and actually showed her the scars of his abuse, but he didn't want to report it. So I think the issue of men, and another person identified the fact that people laugh, and the policemen would probably make fun of the guy. And so men tend to not speak about things like that. But we all know that if you're going to take action, if something is going to happen, you speak and sometimes things don't happen. So just imagine when you say nothing.
Exactly.
And even though we are hearing it's happening, studies are showing it, but then you have to have the evidence. When we speak of and we look at advocacy, we talk about men and women. We're not exclusive and we're not excluding men.
Right.
But I think we cannot expect that the voices will be louder for men than it would be for women. So it's across the board. And men need to speak up. There's no two ways about it. There's no hiding behind the curtain. They have to speak up. If they're being abused, then they need to say they're being abused. And in what ways they're being abused. Is it that they're just being punched and stoned and deprived of certain...
A crime is a crime is a crime is a crime.
Exactly.
And men need to report crimes against their person
Yes.
as well.
And again, silence is not golden.
It's not
Exactly.
golden.
But before the caller, we were talking about, we have another call. Good evening. We lost that call. But we're talking about forensic capacity. I know our forensic lab has been in a lot of pressure. But talk about the significance of that in the case of domestic violence or gender-based violence.
I would say it's critical.
Absolutely.
Because in the case of gender-based violence, if it is sexual violence, if it is rape, if it is whatever form of violence, with the right kind of forensic analysis, the case is a lot more likely to be successfully prosecuted if you have a very effectively run forensic lab. And so I think forensic, especially in today's modern environment, is critical to the success of a successful judicial system.
I know that in Antigua, they had come up with some kind of system that would allow the setting up of an arrangement, because they were losing a lot of cases because they didn't have the evidence that the forensic work would provide them. And I think once that arrangement was in place, they were amazed at what a difference it made. So we have at least one example in terms of Antigua, where an arrangement that they set up because I guess setting up these things are expensive because of all that we know, and countries tend to shy away sometimes from that, or they're limited by their ability to come up with the necessary resources. But sometimes that there are arrangements that can be made that allows them to get the same thing. So there's no doubt that that is an important part of bridging the gaps and plugging in the needs that we have, you know.
Is there anything else that is vital to combating crimes of that nature?
I would say, for me, it's prevention. And once we have addressed the issue of prevention, we may find our resources can allow us to deal adequately with the addressing part of it. Once the crime has been committed, then what do we do? How do we work on that? So we have to get back to basics in terms of education, in terms of working in schools, working with parents, working with teachers, the community.
Okay, we have about 1 minute left. I want to split it between you, 30 seconds
Okay.
each. Parting words.
I would say that there is progress in spite of the fact that it looks as if things are bleak and the prospects are bleak. There is progress. I can see a growing commitment for people to advocate and to speak out and to do something, and we have to continue along that path.
Sherry?
I would like to end by saying silence is not golden when it comes to any form of gender-based violence. I would like to encourage citizens to speak out against it. You can speak out by calling the radio stations, by calling the television stations and their talk shows. You can call out by reporting it. And I think if we all as a society do our part, that would go a long way in terms of eliminating gender-based violence. I also want to use this opportunity to thank UNFPA for fully funding and hosting this important 3-day workshop in St. Lucia, and also for the amazing work that UNFPA has been doing in the Caribbean region in terms of the ICPD agenda and ensuring that the Caribbean is represented at all the various stages in terms of preparation for the Cairo plus 14 plus 20 conference, which is going to be held in New York in April next year. So thanks.
I will be sure to pass that on to my director and deputy director.
We are very grateful.
Okay. And I'm very grateful for the two of you coming on the show this evening after the long day that you've had. I appreciate you taking the time to spend with us. I appreciate our viewers who have called in, who watched this evening. We've been talking with Joelle Coelho-Rosberg, the gender specialist, with the specialist that is with the UNFPA, as well as Flavia Cherry, the national CAFRA representative. Thank you so much for joining us. And you, thank you for watching. Thank you for calling. Join us next week for another edition of Newsmaker Live right here on DBS. See you then.